I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, for making your way through the fog to find your way to our event. We are really excited to have the candidates for the Democratic nomination for Warren Davidson seat. That would be awesome. So we just have a lovely evening tonight of getting to know these folks and hearing where they stand on different issues and taking your questions.
Are you done? Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. So, again, I want to welcome everyone tonight. I just want to remind everyone that this event was sponsored and planned by Indivisible Springfield and is no way connected or shares the views of the church as a community. I just want to go over the format real quick. The candidates have seen the format prior to tonight. Each candidate will be given 3 minutes to make an opening statement. Each candidate will, and then when we get to the question portion, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer each question. If the candidate's name is mentioned in another candidate's answer, that candidate will be given a 3-minute rebuttal, or a 1-minute rebuttal, sorry. If the moderator feels like the candidate didn't answer the question, follow-up questions will be made. And then each candidate will be given an additional 3 minutes for closing. We will try to get to all questions in this short period of time that we have. Any unanswered questions will be submitted to the candidates, and we will provide a written response on our website. If time allows, we'll have a short meet and greet in the lobby area right after this question and answer portion. If you have a question sheet, can you please bring it up to us? We only have 3. We're going to go ahead and get started with Ted Jones, who will give his 3-minute opening statement.
Well, I want to thank Springfield Indivisible for hosting this event tonight. I think these events are very important. It gives the public the opportunity to come out and listen to all the jibber-jabber that we do from time to time. The 4 of us have been kind of hitting the trail together, so our stories are not new to anybody that's up there, but they may be new to you. Like I said, Bradley said, my name is Ted Jones, and we're all running for the 8th Congressional District. We all want to beat Warren Davidson. One of us will go through, and hopefully one of us will just beat the crap out of him, if I can say that. My story really starts in Pennsylvania. I was born and raised in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And that's an area where, if you're familiar with Bethlehem at all, it's the home of Bethlehem Steel. I was a steel worker for a while. My father was a steel worker. My grandfather was a steel worker. My brother was a steel worker. What I'm saying is our whole family were steel workers. So we have a real close relationship with United Steel Workers of America. In fact, I was a shop steward at one time early on in my career. Fast forward, the plant that I was working in closed. So I came out here. One thing I don't want to neglect to say is that I'm also a veteran of the United States Coast Guard. Right after school, I enlisted. I didn't wait to be drafted. At that time, and it still is, the United States Coast Guard is an all-voluntary service. Now, these days, it's all voluntary. But I'm rather proud of my service in the United States Coast Guard, only because during my years of service, I was instrumental in helping save 4 seamen at sea. Their ship had caught fire, and we were put on the vessel, and we knocked down the fire and saved their lives. What made it really important was that we saved the ship as well. I'm a retired factory manager by profession. I made my life in industry and manufacturing. And out of that, I had this strong desire to serve the public. I did serve appointed office for a while back in Pennsylvania, served about 3 years. And The short story is I want to serve the residents of the 8th Congressional District the way it should be represented, not the way it's being represented now. We all know what that means. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to say thank you all for coming out and for being engaged in this process. My name is Dr. Vanessa Enoch. Most people know me as Doc Enoch in this campaign, and it's kind of easy to remember that, right? I have lived in Westchester, Ohio for the past 15 years. Everybody know where Westchester is? Okay, some people do. It is a gerrymandered district, so it is about an hour and 15 minutes or so south of here. So I have raised my daughters in Westchester, Ohio, or in the 8th District, as you all are in the 8th District right now. And I raised my daughters for the past 9 years or so. I've raised my daughters as a single mother. My husband passed away of an aneurysm and a stroke in 2009. And prior to that, I grew up in Colerain Township, where I went to I graduated from public schools, but I also attended private schools, Catholic schools at some point. But I am a huge advocate of the public school system, and I believe that in Washington they're trying to gut that public school system right now, which is a tremendous problem, which is one of the issues which is driving me right now. In fact, what's driving me to run for U.S. Congress right now is a whole host of issues. I believe that the people who currently sit in those seats don't care anything about most of us. They're all part of the 1%. Are there any 1%ers in here? I'm just asking because I need campaign donations, so. Nonetheless, I am the first child in my family to have ever graduated from college. My grandmother wanted me to go, and so I decided to go all the way through to attain a PhD. So I received a PhD in public policy and social change. I also have a master's in business administration, and I grew up in a union family. My mother was a member of the local 440, Communication Workers of America, and so I understood real early what a scab was and what it meant to live on union pay. So I'm running for U.S. Congress because I believe that I can make a difference. I believe that I have been trained. I was born and bred in Ohio, and I believe that because of my passion for the issues and the work that I've already been doing, that running for U.S. Congress is really a duty and a responsibility. To whom much is given, much is expected. And I believe that it's our responsibility when we have concerns to get in the game and to get active and busy. Thank you so much, and I think we're on to Matthew now.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Guyette, resident of Greenville, Ohio. Been living there since about 2006. Originally grew up in northern Connecticut in a small town. My parents had a small business. My dad made handmade furniture, and that gave me a real appreciation for personal responsibility and the struggles that small businesses confront. I was an exchange student in high school, went to South America, lived in Colombia for a year. I'm fluent in Spanish, studied business administration at the University of Connecticut, and later got a degree in international studies at a very small school up in Vermont, which is where my parents are actually originally from. I lived in Boston for about 10 years, worked for the city of Boston, doing grant management, grant writing, managing some youth programs up there, using an empowerment model, which I thought was a great way to get kids involved and give them some experience. Lived in Washington for about 15 years, did some contract work for the Organization of American States around natural hazards and hazard mitigation, regional planning. Most recently, I was working in the U.S. Capitol for 4 years. I worked for Congress, and I was a certified interpretive guide. I was a member of AFSCME, the union, and I also was a union organizer and help to get as many people as possible signed up. You'd think in a place like the Capitol, they would treat everybody with kid gloves, but we actually needed the union in several instances just to get people treated fairly and to get Congress to treat them according to what the rules were that they had written. I'm running because I think Warren Davidson, he's a good man. He has a great resume. He's very impressive, but I think he's in over his head. I think he's a protege of Jim Jordan, who helped him get elected. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus, and I think these are well-meaning people. They think if you just get government out of the way, everything is going to be a paradise. But all of us in this room know how misguided that approach is. The government is the only thing standing between the average person and the abuses of corporations and other big entities that most of us wouldn't even know how to go up against. So I do believe that occasionally government can get in the way, and we need to always look at how we can streamline government, make it more efficient, do more with the money that is available, so we are good stewards of the tax dollars that we collect. But I'm a very strong proponent of a strong safety net. This is the world I grew up in. I was born in 1961. I grew up with the baby boomers in a society where the least of us were taken care of, where we had programs to make sure that if somebody fell through the cracks, they didn't fall by the side of the road, because everybody in their life occasionally needs a hand up. And I believe government has a very strong role to play in that. So that's one of the reasons that I'm running. I see Warren Davidson working as an enabler for Trump, and I think he needs to be replaced.
I'm Bill Ebben, and I'm going to probably rely more on my notes than I usually do, because my original version of my opening statement was 7 minutes, so I had to cut out all the good stuff. So I'm Bill Ebben. I support American values. I am pro-family. I'm a veteran and blue-collar union worker. I worked in a foundry, swinging a 20-pound hammer, knocking apart the molds and the things that we made. I worked in Nina Foundry, so you walk down the street, you see those round things that says Nina Foundry. Well, I made every one of those. And then from there, I got a job as a Teamster. The Teamsters covers warehousing too, so I didn't drive. I stacked 100-pound sacks of dried dairy whey, 3 across and 8 high, which would fill up a box car. So I've been a teacher, a father, I'm an attorney, but I'm the kind of attorney that doesn't practice law, so I'm one of the good ones. I just couldn't get past that in the first intro to law, that unit about robbing widows and orphans. I just couldn't get it. So I've been a progressive all my life. I think that 80% of Americans have good common sense, and I refer to us, thanks to Vanessa, as the mighty middle. Because, well, you stole my
He said my name. Do I get 3 minutes?
Anyway, the mighty middle, the 80% of us that are in the middle, I don't care what the radical left, the 10% on that side, I don't care about the radical right 10%, because they can't agree with each other ever, and they've dug their heels in, nothing gets done. The 80% in the middle, I talk to Republicans every day who are so close in their feelings about issues as I am. We're like 2 peas in a pod. So I want to get money out of our politics. I want to get ideas back in. I'm fighting for working families because those are the only families I know. Any legislation that has a negative impact on families and the middle class should be dead on arrival at Congress. So even now I'm going to have to skip a bunch of stuff. I think we need a strong middle class with money to spend. When we do, we're all better off. The reason I'm running is that 13 months ago, my son died of an overdose. And I realized very quickly after that it wasn't the drugs that killed him. It was the way that we deal with drugs. The war on drugs never helps any addicts. We do this interdiction, that doesn't do anything. And we leave addicts with the only place they can get what they need while they're trying to get into a treatment program. They have to go to the dealers. So I want to get there and change direction. The war on drugs is not working, and there are better ways to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, the first question is we're gonna start with Vanessa, and then we'll work our way back around. So the first question is, would you vote to impeach Trump? Why or why not?
This is a trick question. I'd vote to impeach Trump. The trouble that I have is the fact that Trump was able to walk in the doors with all the information we know about tampering with elections, with the fact that he did not win the popular vote. That's troublesome to me. Don't you steal my water, I need that. I'm joking, he's my cousin. Anyway, my maiden name is Jones, that's real. With all that we know about the fact that he didn't win the popular vote, the electoral college system is a broken system because it steals the will of the American people, and that's troublesome to me. So yes, I would vote to not even allow him to come in the door without at least dealing with the Russia issue, because we knew that information before he ever took office.
Same question.
Yep, same question.
Impeachment is a very weighty process. Impeachment is a trial that's conducted by the House of Representatives, and the referrals go over to the Senate for the decision. I would hate to prejudge and say, as of what I know today, I would impeach Trump. I think a lot of evidence exists already just in the public sphere against Trump, particularly in the obstruction of justice realm. Bob Mueller is working diligently on that, and he's a very competent prosecutor. I think for the House of Representatives to be taken seriously in an impeachment process, they would have to do the same kind of process that Bob Mueller is doing. They would have to review all of the evidence and decide whether the conduct was willful, corrupt, and rises to the level to remove a president, which is a very weighty thing. It's one of the most serious responsibilities a member of Congress ever confronts. I follow the news like probably all of you do, and I feel like we're at a point, this is not a normal election year. And if you go to my website and read why I'm running and read some of what I say in my intro, I really believe that we're at a point where our democracy is at risk. I don't have the evidence, but I believe that Trump colluded with the Russians or people in his administration, and I believe that he knew about it, and that's how he got elected. But in order for the American people to arrive at that same conclusion, I think the process has to be followed. So I would reserve judgment today. I'm not ready to say today Trump should be impeached, because that's a very weighty charge. But I definitely think there's enough evidence there to open impeachment proceedings, and I would vote to do that were I to be elected to Congress.
I would definitely vote to impeach Trump. I do want the investigation to go on long enough to get into everything he's done. But I would impeach him for things that he's already done in public. He's destroyed our relationship with a number of our allies and changed it in the world. He's thrown away the respect that we built up over the last, since World War I. Europe, they look to us and they know that we saved their butt in World War I and in World War II, and then we had the Marshall Plan to put them back on their feet. We could have just sat back as the superpower and let them wallow in the damage that was done in World War II, and we'd have been all much ahead of them just because of that. And then if Trump had been in charge then, that's what would have happened. And he throws these things away. He throws away, I think, oh, that's over. Yeah, it is. He throws away our reputation like it was a used Kleenex. I don't think he has any idea the value of the things that he has destroyed. He's like a bull in a china shop. He's breaking plates all over the place, and he thinks they're of no consequence because he doesn't understand them. I don't think that he's a businessman. I think if we took up a collection here, we might have more money than he has, especially honest money. I think he's made most of his money by laundering money for Russian oligarchs. When like SimFed or one of the investigative units are looking for money launderers, they look for two businesses. One is casinos, because a casino is a money laundromat. The dirty money comes in through the front door and goes out the back clean. And the other thing is large cash transfers of real estate, and he's done both. So he's guilty.
I'm going to stand up because I have a tough time talking and sitting at the same time. One of the things that I'm going to say that I agree in essence with what everybody was saying here. Our country is based on laws. We are a nation of laws. And I think what Robert Mueller is doing is so important because he's going to make the case for the American people. We all have our suspicions on what Trump has been doing. I don't think anybody's wrong in that. I think everyone that expressed themselves here is actually on the right trail. Donald Trump is nothing more than a person that takes advantage of any opportunity that comes along. And he isn't any better than the lawyers that back him up. The guy is undisciplined. He doesn't deserve, in my view, he doesn't even deserve to be in the Oval Office. But he's there. And he's there because we have an electoral college that put him there. Now, if you look at the electoral college, the way it operates now, it doesn't operate the same way as it did when it was earlier envisioned by our founding fathers. Back then in the day, the American public wasn't very educated. Now we are very educated. So I think the court, eventually, the Electoral College will go away, and maybe some of that will help our situation. I would wait until the evidence came in, that the case was made, and then we vote. And based on what I'm seeing, my feeling is that I would vote for impeachment as well. I hope and I pray that the Congress gets to him before we vote, because I don't think he's helping our nation at all. Like was said, he's turning our friends against us, and he's embracing our enemies. So for that reason, he doesn't belong there.
Thank you. We're going to start with Matthew. This question is going to go to all four. What is your plan to deal with discrimination that the transgender community faces daily, including the restroom issue? Including the restroom issue.
Well, as a gay man, I faced discrimination in my life. I remember the 1990s when the Republican Party and the right conflated child molesters with gay people and tried to turn the country against us and fought us at every turn, every time we tried to just be treated the same as everyone else. I'm thankful that I've lived to see a day in my lifetime where people like me are accorded the same rights as other Americans. I've been with the same man for 22 years in July, and never imagined getting married. It wasn't really on the top of my radar, really, to be honest with you. Especially after so many years, I felt like, what is a piece of paper going to do that's going to change what he and I have together, the commitment that we have? Because to me, that's what's really important, is what we've built over time in our hearts. But a little over a year ago, end of December in 2016, we actually decided to get legally married here in Ohio. There's some legal reasons, filing taxes, inheritance, things like that. And I was amazed at how emotional it was for me when we did the ceremony. I think transgender people today are facing many of the same issues that I faced as a gay man over my lifetime. We've moved the ball for gays and lesbians, but transgender people now are facing that same discrimination. I think, we have the Equal Protection Clause in our Constitution for a reason. The government particularly must treat all citizens equally unless there's some very compelling reason not to. And so far, I have not seen that reason as it relates to transgender people. If they can do the work of being in the military, they should be able to serve alongside everybody else. I don't think there's any reason to not let them serve.
The issue of, get right to the bathroom issue, the people who are most vocal about that are generally men. And I think the ones who get really excited about it are the ones we ought to be looking at to wonder why. How is it that they came up with this in their head, that there's a problem there? When I go to the restroom, what you do in your stall is your own business. And I just don't get it. I know Republicans want smaller government, but I've always said they want the government to be just small enough to fit in your bedroom. It's a stupid issue. The people who are complaining about it have made this up in their head that there's something there, and I think it's because they think if they were there, they would try to take advantage of the situation in some way. It seems to me that either go to single-person restrooms, but you can't do that in school. But as long as there's stalls with operative locks, and there's always in school, you're always going between classes. The place is packed. Nobody can pull anything because it's a crowd. So it's a made-up problem. And sometimes I think they make up these problems like a magician does. Say, look at the shiny object over here so you don't see their other hand here where they're stealing your wallet. And we need to be careful about that, not get sucked in on that. So, thank you.
Once again, I go back to the law. We're a nation of laws. We have a constitution, and I believe that we have equal protection under those laws. We should be free, and so long as we're not violating laws, that we live our life to the best of our ability. And that transcends all sexuality as far as I'm concerned. You have the right to live your life the way you see it, to love the people that you love. So do I. And I think, like Bill alluded to, people have a way of making a lot out of something that's really nothing. It would probably go away if people were talking about it. I don't care who comes into a restroom next to me. I'm in and out of there. I do my business and I'm out of there. Matthew touched on something as well. The laws that are established in our United States allows people to live their life the way they need to live it. We've almost forced the issue in some ways because the laws are forcing people to get married because of the HIPAA laws, because of inheritance and so on. Again, I think some people are just making too much out of this. I've been married for 51 years to my wife, sitting right there. She's my high school sweetheart. I don't see anything wrong with Matthew finding somebody that he would love with the same passion that I have for my wife. We're making too much out of nothing. And that's my position.
Thank you. First and foremost, on the point that I agree with everyone on this stage is that everybody should be treated fairly. I believe that everybody has the right to be treated fairly. I do, in a sense, part company with the gentleman on the stage, being that I am a lady. And there are women who, I believe as women, that there are safety issues, or at least we perceive that there could be safety issues when we think of men and women using the same restrooms. I've had the opportunity to walk into unisex bathrooms in Europe, and I was very shocked the first time I went into a restroom and men and women use the restroom. And I think that culture shock of sharing the bathroom cross-gender made me sensitive to the people who say, oh no, we can't use the same restrooms, because I understand the feeling, the discomfort. I think right now, probably just understanding that there is a level of discomfort, and really as a woman, the discomfort has nothing to do with believing that transgender people should not have the right to use the same bathrooms. The discomfort is, how do I know the difference between someone who is transgender and someone who is coming into the restroom to violate me? And in a restroom, in an intimate setting, in a private place, I think that as a woman, my fear would be, this may be somebody who could be a violator, who might be in there to do harm to me. So I think that as we broach that subject of sharing the restroom, that we have to be sensitive to women and sensitive to our fear for our safety, not so much us believing that people don't have or should not have the opportunity to have the same rights, but just rather we need to make sure that as we are looking at transgendered restrooms, that it's not something that we feel is going to jeopardize our safety as a woman.
Okay. This question is actually going to go to Vanessa. It's specifically to her. So there's basically two questions, and they're both regarding your website.
Okay.
There's two terms that are used on the website, and one is charity starts at home. Warren Davidson uses that term a lot, so we would like you to explain
Oh,
that.
Lord.
Charity starts at home.
Charity
I
starts.
definitely don't want to use the same. Okay,
The
go ahead.
second term is, on the website, is advocate for strong families. The term strong families has been used for years as an anti-LGBT slogan.
Oh,
And so, can you explain your meaning in both of these terms on your website?
okay. And thank you for that. And I've never heard Warren Davidson use the term charity starts at home. I was asked that question when I walked in the door today. And what I meant by that term, I think it's up there in the paragraph with where I talk about being a mom and I talk about raising my children. And so what that means for me, it means two things. One thing is that my responsibility is first to my children. And then the other thing it means is that my responsibility is first to Ohio. So my personal thought process has never moved in that realm. And then the other one was strong families. I do believe in strong families. I believe that we must keep families together. And that, the strong families comment, I believe, was it in the same paragraph with DACA or anything about, it was probably associated with.
The statement says that she is a devout Christian and an advocate for strong families.
Yeah, I am a strong Christian, by the way. And I do believe that I do believe in strong families. I believe that we should not be separating families. And one of the things that has concerned me is with this new attack on immigrants, that they're taking mothers and fathers out of those households. Some of these folks have been in this country for 20 and 30 years, and they're sending them into camps. And rather than sending them back to their country, which is what they're claiming the objective is going to be, They're putting them in concentration camps. And I do believe that that is going to be the next mass incarceration movement. In fact, the biggest donors to Trump's campaign were folks who run private prisons. And in fact, they just received a $51 million contract. As soon as Jeff Sessions changed the law and said, we're gonna start with another war on drugs, they opened a lot of those places back up. And that's when we started seeing them snatching people out of their homes. Dentists who had practices for 25 and 30 years were separated from their families. Mothers who had 6 kids at home in Butler County, snatched away from their families and put into these camps or into prisons. And that concerns me.
Thank you. Okay. So the next question is, it's kind of related to each other, and this is going to go to everyone. And we will start with Bill. What are you going to do to get a national health care, and what is your position on the ACA?
I think there was a problem with the ACA, and it's a political problem. When Barack Obama came into office, I think he had a great deal of political capital, and he wanted to use it to improve our healthcare system. But I think he made the calculation, and I think he was correct, that he was going to have to leave the for-profit insurance companies in the system. And I just don't see any reason to keep them, the for-profit people, in there. They're a parasite on our system. Every dollar that goes into the pocket of an overpaid CEO, and for that matter, shareholders, those dollars don't buy any health care at all. And that just drives up the cost. There's needless duplication. How many of these health insurance companies are out there? There's plenty. So there's got to be, they've got call centers in each company, so that's duplication. They've got clerks in everyone. And then the profit motive means that they have to get the maximum amount of money out of us that they can and pay out the least. I say that we're already a single payer system, and people don't realize it. You know who the single payer is? It's us. When we pay the premium, we pay the co-pays, we pay for the donut hole, we pay for the life, if we go over the lifetime cap. Nowhere in there did the hospital, big pharma, or the insurance company say, oh no, we got this one, we got you covered. So we're the only payers. Why does anybody else have anything to say about how we pay?
My feelings are much like what Bill was saying. The doctors that I've talked to all indicate that they have these large staffs now that they would not necessarily have to have if they didn't have to pay or process the paperwork. If they could get rid of that and go back to being doctors, we'd be farther ahead. I have a good friend that lives in Canada. And the more that they were telling me about how the Canadian system works, the more I see a better fit for that kind of system here in the U.S. Where you take the insurance companies out of the picture, you dramatically drop your costs. One of the companies that I work for, I helped negotiate a healthcare contract for our company. And the guy that came in that talked to us was a broker. And before we even sat down and got into the meat of the conversation, he said, your premiums are going to go up 33%. We only had 2 claims that year. If we can get the insurance companies out of the equation, that's going to free up so much money that we can afford to pump that money back in to our healthcare systems. That's going to make a dramatic difference on everybody's life, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I think I'll give you the balance of my time, because I think that it's not a real hard problem. We can solve it. All we need is the will.
Thanks, cousin. I believe the starting point on the healthcare issue is to, first of all, understand where the costs are. Are we dealing with real cost, or are we dealing with greed? And, you know, when I walk into a hospital room and I get a bill for $6 for a Band-Aid, and I know at Dollar General I can pick them up for 99 cents, and they're buying these things in bulk, I'm concerned about, you know, where these costs are, how are these costs being assessed. I think that we need to look at the possibility of a public option for hospitalization. I support affordable care. I think that we didn't go far enough with Barack Obama. I think that going the distance would mean that we are looking, or we should be looking at healthcare a lot like we look at firemen and policemen and libraries. Healthcare should be a right for all of us. And my solution would be to look at a publicly funded healthcare system. And there are publicly funded healthcare systems throughout the world. France also has a publicly funded system, just as you mentioned, Canada. And we need to be looking at some of those options. I think that would alleviate the greed and the abuse. As we know, we all know that the cost of an aspirin should be $30 or $40. But if you're at a hospital and you're getting an itemized bill, you'll find just exorbitant costs for, you know, ridiculously high costs for just average, ordinary things. I understand the profit motive, but I think we're being gouged. And I believe that a public option, and I'm not talking about a subsidy the way it is currently in the Affordable Care Act. I think that inevitably, when you start talking about subsidies, that it has a negative connotation, and people begin to think of that as a form of welfare or, you know, what have you. I believe that we have a right, or should have a right, to health care.
Great topic, and something that affects so many Americans. I followed the healthcare debate not only under Obama, but I remember following it under Clinton, as I'm sure a lot of people in this room did. And if you remember the ads that the right wing, the Republicans and the insurance companies ran, it was this couple talking about how much worse everything was. The right is very good at demonizing anything that we on the left try to do. We're focused on trying to help people, try to provide solutions. All they have to focus on is packaging, because their whole thing is government is the problem, let's do nothing, and then they focus on packaging. I support the ACA, Affordable Care Act and Patient Protection Act. I think it works well when people stop sabotaging it, which is what we're seeing right now from the right wing. They're trying to shake the table and introduce uncertainty into the insurance markets, and so the insurers are having to factor in that uncertainty into their pricing. And as the prices go up, people turn against it. And that's what I think we saw over the last 3 or 4 years, this backlash against it. Even though there were a lot of benefits, a lot of protections, covering pre-existing conditions, elimination of lifetime limits, annual limits, making insurance companies spend 85% of what they collect on actual health care, but yet people see their premiums going up and they get scared. My solution, in the long run, if the country were run by Democrats, I would love to see universal health care paid for by the government. However, we're not in that situation. So in the short term, I support a public option like was discussed before we started negotiating the ACA. It would be an alternative to the private insurance that's being offered. So people, if somebody wanted government insurance, similar to Medicare or similar to the VA, they could opt into that and let the marketplace determine which one is more successful and less money. I'm sorry, will you give me a signal? That's it.
Okay. Okay,
You still have the 30 seconds, but
we're going to start with Ted.
I'm quite sure.
These next two questions are going to be in the more workers' rights realm of things. So the first question is, what are you going to do to expand workers' rights and increase the right of workers to unionize?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the union movement. There's a movement afoot through the Republican agenda to reduce the rights of workers, and they're incrementally just chipping away at workers' rights. I think we really need to back the union movement. The unions, in my time, made the middle class. I can remember a time when my dad was on the picket line, and he brought the groceries home for us to eat. I mean, that's all we had. If we wouldn't have had that, I don't know what we would have done. So how that affected me, that affects me to this day. Right to work is one of the most hideous things that somebody ever came up with. All that does is divide people. The factory that I worked in Pennsylvania closed their shop and moved down south, to South Carolina, because South Carolina was a right to work state. So essentially what you had was South Carolina actually paid the company to come down there, build their factory, build their training facilities, hired a lot of people down there. But the union struck back. They went down there, they organized the workers, and it became a union shop. Those people's wages went up about 30%. That's not going to happen if corporations are allowed to do what they want to do unchecked. We need to back the union's efforts to organize. We need to protect their rights to organize. And I would be a firm advocate in doing that if I get on to go to Washington. Thank you.
Okay, they're not grabbing for the mic, so I guess that means I get to go next. I agree with everything that Ted said, and I'm not sure if most people understand the impact that the unions have in the lives of both the poor and the middle class. It is really the unions that have been the backbone of working families in this country. And it has also been the unions that has been the backbone of the Democratic Party in this country. If they're able to gut unions, they're able to essentially destroy this country. Because what that would leave is a one-party system, and it would leave a one-party system because there would be nobody to advocate for working folks. And as we know, even from this last tax deal, for anybody who has looked into this in depth, in a few years, even the new tax bill that was just passed will only benefit the 1%. It is a scam. And it was a scam really to, I keep telling people we've been reverse Robin Hooded. It was a scam to take money from working people and put it into the hands of the wealthy. But they capitalized on it, they twisted the language on it to the extent that people were actually proud of this tax bill. And it's scary to me because we won't find out the real impact until next year when it comes time to file taxes. And you realize that all of the deductions we've become accustomed to for working families are gone.
My feeling about unionization and what to do about it is similar to my feeling about the minimum wage. For 50 years, big corporations and their water carriers, the Republican Party, have hammered unions, hammered workers in the United States, and particularly in Ohio. They've done this by moving jobs overseas. So they're putting a gun to people's heads, and they do this locally. They'll say, well, Springfield, if you don't give us everything we want, tax breaks, all the laws we want, all the hookups to sewer and water, we're just going to move to somewhere else. You know, we'll move to Dayton, or we'll move to Mobile, Alabama, or Birmingham. So big corporations have played this game very skillfully, and they've had the Republican Party in their pocket to help them do it. I think that by paying for our military, we're spending $700+ billion a year on our military to maintain a global economic empire. We don't have the empire that ancient Rome had, where it had the government to go with it. We're paying for the protection of all these corporations that have moved their operations overseas. So they're able to manufacture and mine and produce and transport all around the world, protected by the US military, which the middle class pays for, and the lower class staffs, because they don't have any other viable opportunities. And what it does is it puts manufacturers here in Ohio up against somebody who's manufacturing overseas at a much lower price. Even though those overseas manufacturers have to pay a lot more in transportation costs, but who does that benefit? The oil companies. And we all know who they support. So I think until we address this issue of globalization, corporations moving overseas and us paying for their security, I don't think we're ever going to see this change. I think that's the keystone that all the rest of it relies on, and until we address that, we won't be able to fix the other issues.
Every American alive today owes a very significant part of their standard of living to unions, even if they've never worked in a union. Because when a union, like Ted was saying, when a union negotiates in South Carolina and gets their wages raised by 30%, well, anybody else that's in South Carolina in that area, they're going to have to pay more for their people too. Because otherwise, all the good people are going to go to the union shop, and they're not going to have decent people to do it. And unions do a lot of training. I know the IBEW is monsters of training. That's number one. I could talk about unions all day. I've been a member of 4 unions. But I think there's a solution, sort of a back door that I'd like to try. Right now, it's considered the rights of the states to incorporate businesses that are located in their state. Well, that turns out to be a race to the bottom, because the states give away more and more of the people's rights to get corporations to set up in their state. And sometimes it's just a sham, a post office box. If we took that away from the states, and they'll scream when we do it, but if we made incorporation a federal function, now all the states are on an even footing. They can't race each other to the bottom, giving away everything that they have just to attract a business. And so it would level the playing field, and we'd have great people working at great wages everywhere. So I think we can, I'm going to try and sneak that through.
Okay, so this question, we'll start with Vanessa.
I'd like to start with Bill. He was, he already had the mic.
Well, I think you're going to want this question.
Okay.
Thank you. What are you going to do to promote equal pay and better treatment of women?
I do want this question. Part of the reason, one of the things that made me decide to go ahead and run for office is that I was watching, in fact, I was on the internet and I was looking at a newspaper clipping, and it was a room full of men deciding on women's health issues. And I was so troubled by that because I don't think that men understand the plight of women. And as a single mom and having to support a family on, my salary, and even the understanding that pay is not equal across the board for doing the same job, I think that the people who sit in those seats need to understand what that looks like for us, so that they can understand that we do, first of all, we've earned the right, if we're doing the same job, we've earned the right to be paid the same amount of money. Second of all, just to understand what it looks like for a single mom. You know, as a single mom, you know, there's nobody else in my household that's bringing home the bacon. It's my responsibility, or any single person for that matter. Right now, the minimum wage is not enough to support a family. A minimum wage is not enough to support an individual for that matter. And we understand that. In Ohio, we've already estimated it costs about $15. So I will introduce legislation, and I will also support legislation that supports equal pay and equal rights for women across the board.
Oh, it's all of us? Okay, great.
First off, I'm going to put out there, because I'm going to criticize Hillary a little bit in her campaign. I'm going to say I voted for Bernie in the primary. In 2016, I voted for Hillary in the general, because I saw the train wreck that was coming. However, Hillary had a couple flaws in her campaign. I'm not going to relitigate the whole thing. But I think as Democrats, we're so focused on solving people's problems, we want to go to wherever the problems are, wherever the injustice is, wherever the unfairness is, and we want to make it right. And we assume that everybody watching us will see that we're doing the right thing and get behind us. I think Hillary made a mistake in the way she presented a lot of her issues. She talked a lot about helping women and girls get into engineering, getting into sciences, medicine, all these other things, where they're not as highly represented as men are, where pay is still not at parity with men. And I think she focused so much on the problem that she came across as just wanting to help women to the exclusion of men. And I think that's a criticism that the right often levels against us on the left. They say, you guys have all these special interest groups, and that's who you work for. What about me? I'm not part of one of those special interest groups. I'm not a woman. I'm not a minority. I'm not gay. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm just an everyday American trying to pay my bills and raise my family. What are you going to do for me? So I think the Democratic Party, we're on the right track. We're doing the right thing. But I think we have to focus a little bit more on how we present it to the American people. Because as you well know, the 8th District is not a majority Democrat district. We have to present what we want to do and who we are in ways that will appeal to Republicans and independents. So I would present this as an issue of fairness, because that's a basic American value. Women should be paid the same as men for doing the same work. So.
I want an America that lives up to its promise. I'm going to tell you just a little story that actually cuts across all the issues. When I was in 7th grade, we had a teacher who, as one of our social studies, one of the exercises was to write what we imagined the United States would be like in the year 2000. And I had been active in protesting the war, protesting poverty. I had the privilege of walking with Jesse Jackson in Operation Breadbasket, which wasn't about black and white, it was just about food for poor people. So I had this idea what the United States would be like. And I gotta tell you, when the year 2000 hit, I looked around and said, this ain't it. And I didn't know the half of it, because when Trump started on the campaign, I found out that I thought we'd made so many strides against racism, sexism, but when Trump came out, I realized, no, what we did was we took all these Neanderthals, and the one thing they learned was to not talk about it. And then when Trump came out and he was talking about it, all of a sudden it was okay for them to talk about, and I realized we had not made anywhere near the kind of progress that we needed to make. And it absolutely applies to women. The Equal Rights Amendment was what, 1975, I think? And here we are, almost 50 years later, and the rights aren't equal now. So we got to get out there, we need to talk about our values, because the Republicans talk about values, but it's always a lie.
I keep forgetting, I'm sorry.
One of the advantages of having been a plan manager and ultimately a president of a company, you can set monetary policy, and that's one of the things that I did. Of course, we look around and see what other people are paying and see what we can do. But I can tell you that the policies that we set in our factory, men, women, whoever did the job, got paid that particular rate. Didn't matter who the person was, they got that particular rate. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that I could sell that idea. We approached it with equality in mind. And the sidebar to that is that we started retaining people more than probably most people in that particular area. Once we raised the salaries up, our turnover went way, way down. So there's benefits to paying people an equitable wage, man or woman. It's all depending on what you bring to the job, the skills that you have. If you're doing the same work, you get the same pay, and that's the bottom line. Thank you.
Okay, one more question as far as workers' rights. What will you do to increase the number of good paying jobs, $15 or more? And we'll start with Matthew. With me.
Well, unfortunately, this goes back to what I said earlier about unions. Until we start bringing back good paying jobs from overseas, reinvigorating the middle class with higher wages, I do feel like a lot of solutions that are being suggested are just Band-Aids. If you mandate, in my previous campaign, I ran 4 years ago against a man named Tom Petter. You may remember that race. And I advocated for a $15 minimum wage at that time. I'm still open to that idea. I would like to see some more data on it. But my fear is, if you mandate a higher wage, will that force jobs to go somewhere else? Let's say you have 2 manufacturers in Ohio making pencils, and one moves to China, and one stays here in Ohio. The one in China can manufacture the pencils perhaps less expensive than the one here in Ohio. So how is the one here in Ohio going to stay in business? Let's say they want to stay here. They want to keep employing people. They want to be a responsible member of their community. How do we make it possible for those people to thrive? How do we create a climate where it's in their interest to stay here in Ohio, rather than just mandating benefits or wages that we want to see people get? I think all of us in this room agree that the way to energize the economy is by putting money in the pockets of the middle class. The wealthy are going to make some of that anyway, because they always do. They're in a position to take advantage of money when it's in the economy. So I want to see more money in the pockets of the middle class. I still feel like it's a larger issue, because people have wrestled with this over the last 50 years, but we've seen jobs going overseas. And that's why unions are on the ropes, that's why wages are low, that's why people are having trouble finding good paying jobs. So it's a really tough issue.
It's a complicated issue, and I think there's at least 3 big factors. One is globalization. We can't pull up our drawbridge and not participate in the global economy. So we have to get out there and compete, but we also have to try to put pressure on other countries to pay their own workers better. So it's globalization. The next thing is automation. A lot of service jobs, a lot of jobs anywhere are going away because of robotics. You know, they run the Chrysler plant and the Ford plant with a lot fewer employees than they used to, because they have robots doing the welding. And then the newest one that's out there, and perhaps it'll be the really biggest one, is artificial intelligence. There's jobs being held by people right now that we think of as pretty good jobs and they have to know what they're talking about, but artificial intelligence is quickly sneaking up on things. So like when you call, we all hate to call into an insurance company, for example, and we ask a question, and then we hope that the person on the other end of the line knows what they're talking about and gives us the answer. But we're rapidly approaching the time when you can call in, and instead of talking to a person, you're talking to an artificial intelligence computer. And the problem we have as humans is that the computer will have the right answer. They won't be guessing. They'll be up to date on everything that happens. So I think the biggest thing we need to do is push education. And you know, I was a teacher, and I can tell you that education under Republicans has really, really suffered. But we've got to get everybody, the kids got to be going to school. We've got to move ahead.
I would agree. The factory, one of the factories that I worked in, had over 100 robots in it. Those 100 robots took perhaps at least that many workers out of the our worker site work pool. The only way people are going to walk in and take care of those kind of jobs is if they have an education. Getting back to the minimum wage, $15 sounds like a pretty nice number. A $15 minimum wage job in San Francisco may not be enough. It may not be enough in New York City. And it could be 3 times the normal wage that you would find in Baldwin, Ohio, or even Pickwick, Ohio. Pricing a job, and again, this is something that I'm really familiar with. Pricing a job, labor is probably one of the biggest costs any company ever has, along with healthcare costs. You want to do right by the employees, but you can't do it in such a way that you put your company in jeopardy. So it's a fine line, like Matthew said. It's a complicated issue. You want to do the best you can possibly do. So I guess my solution to this is to look at where you work at, the locality you're working at, and be competitive on a labor scale with everybody else that you have in that area. So much of what you bring to the job means a lot, your skill level. That goes back to education. I'm a firm believer in educating like JVCs, Joint Vocational Technical Schools. Those people that graduate from those schools have jobs almost immediately. And they're almost on parity with college graduates when they get out, depending on what vocation they choose. And maybe Bill can verify this. If you have a degree in computer science or some computer skills, you can go to a factory job and almost immediately get hired in to maintain robots. That's a skill not everybody has. So there's a direct correlation between skill level and what you learn in the factory. But I would, as far as the minimum wage goes, I would be advocating for the highest possible minimum wage that one could get.
Thank you, Ted. First of all, let me say I agree with just about everything that was said up here. The one thing I will say is that what made America what America has always been known for in this country is creativity and ingenuity. We were always able to stay above the curve. We were always able to do more, be better, and greater. And that had a lot to do with just good old-fashioned creativity and ingenuity. That's something I think that our country is lacking right now. I do agree with Ted that we need education and training, but we could get all the education and all the training in the world, but if we're not training people with relevant skills that are going to help drive progress in this country, we're in trouble. I worked for GE when GE outsourced to India. GE became the first corporation in this country to outsource to India. They outsourced to India because India had the skills that were needed for the future. My challenge right now with what the direction our country is going in, with all of the regressive policies that have been introduced, with the reintroduction of coal, and of course the pollution that comes with coal, is that they are regressive. That means that we're not focusing on what's going to be needed in the future. And as long as we do that, as we know, China for the past several years has had the highest GDP in the world. They exceeded our GDP. And if we don't return to a place of creativity and ensure that we build our infrastructure in America, then we will not be able to create the jobs that are needed in order to ensure that we put Americans back to work again. So that is more important, I think, in understanding what it is that got us there before and how we get back to it, to know that the policies that are being introduced right now are backwards.
Okay, go ahead and keep the mic for 1 second. This is going to be a yes or no question in order to save time. Would you favor the U.S. rejoining the Paris Climate Accords?
Would I favor?
The U.S. rejoining the Paris Climate Accords.
You know, it is very troubling, some of the things that have happened relative to our environment, and some of the things that the decisions that this current administration has made relative to separating us from policies that are going to protect us. And I would favor ensuring that we are making conscious decisions to not sever relationships in any form that are going to be to our detriment. The protection of our air and our water and our climate and understanding the direction that we're going in is important. And I would definitely favor making sure that we salvage those relationships.
So is that a yes?
Yeah, that is a yes.
Okay. That was a very long yes. Yes or no, please?
Without reservation,
30
yes.
seconds.
The climate is changing, whether we want to admit it or not. The changes are at least partially man-made, so yes. I think it was a big mistake to leave the Paris Climate Accord.
Yes, and that's one of those things that Trump threw away like a dirty Kleenex.
Short answer is yes. I know climate change is happening. I've experienced it for myself. When I was in the military, I was assigned to duty on an icebreaker. I made 3 trips to the Arctic. If you look at some of the places where I actually was, when I was there was ice and snow and polar bears. If you look at the same pictures today, there's no ice, there's no snow, and there's no polar bears. You can believe climate change is happening, and it's because we're not being careful with the environment.
Thank you guys for that answer. We're going to have 2 more questions on the environment. This one is kind of a combination of 2. What is your position on drilling, mining, logging, etc., on protected public lands, i.e. national parks, monuments, wildlife refuges, etc., as well as offshore oil drilling along our coast? We're starting with that.
This is the environmental movement in a nutshell, really. It's about what are we going to do with the patrimony that was handed down to us from the people who set up our national parks, the people who had the forethought when it wasn't very popular to say, these areas are special. We need to protect them for the future. It's also about being good stewards of what we were given. I think that there are situations where grazing on public land doesn't really do a lot of damage. And I think in cases where we can use public lands for the broader benefit, I'm okay with that. But I think it has to be done on a case-by-case basis. And I think that's why we need a strong environmental protection agency and a Bureau of Federal Lands who have the power and the strength and the political clout to stand up to the moneyed interests, to big business, to be able to say, no, I know you want to do this, I know there's money to be made here, perhaps you're going to create jobs, that's all good. We're not against people making money. Making money is a great thing. I love to see people make money. But when you start to do it on the back of the public lands, that's a different standard. And I think that we need to be good stewards. We need to hand down a world that's in better shape than the one we were given. And I think we're doing pretty well on air quality, water quality. Now, none of that has to do with Trump because he's reversing it all. But we've actually reached a pretty good place. And I would like to see us maintain those gains and be good stewards of what was left to us for future generations.
There's so many things. The World War II generation is considered the greatest generation. And I agree with that. They went through heck. And I'm just worried that we're going to be looked at in the future as the greediest generation. These people that want to do mining and lumber, there's other places where they can get that, but they look at these public lands, and if there's an interstate running next to it, they say, you know, if we spent our money mining in this spot, we're going to make a whole lot more than we would if we had to go, you know, across the country to another place. So it's just greed. You know, they're required, if you run a company, you're required by law to make the best return you can for your shareholders. And the problem with that is that profit motive runs counter to a lot of the motives that we'd like to have people doing for things like being a steward of our environment, and how we do things, like fracking. You know, they're bringing fracking to Ohio, but you look at Oklahoma where they started fracking, and they've had this major uptick in how many earthquakes they have. And I have a hard time believing it's not related to fracking. Now, do we want earthquakes here? And it could be worse. We're living along the Laurentian Fault, I believe it's called, which hasn't moved in a long time, but it's been building up energy for a couple of centuries. And we could start fracking and kick that off. I mean, it's going to happen eventually, but I'd rather not have it next week.
I got my start in the environmental movement when I was in the Boy Scouts, if you can believe that. Now, that's a long time ago. But I went through the entire program. And it's left that mark on me. We went into the woods, we left the woods the same way before we went into it. We were stewards, as Bill said, of the land. Businesses have been after our natural resources since the beginning. Since Teddy Roosevelt, I think, was actually president. And Roosevelt, being the good Republican he was, I don't think Roosevelt could actually exist in today's society. But at any rate, you know, he protected our natural resources. He made sure that lands were set aside so they couldn't be prostituted, for lack of a better word. Companies have typically gone in, and if they were allowed to, they would strip all the trees off the face of the earth. And they wouldn't take the care that they have to do now. That's mandated by law. Where I come from in eastern Pennsylvania, there are a lot of coal mines. They're a little bit different in western Pennsylvania or West Virginia. We have what's called hard-face coal, anthracite coal. That's mined a little bit differently, but in the western part of Pennsylvania, they have large strip mines where the land is stripped off. And up until some years ago, the mining companies could just leave it the way they degraded it. Now there's laws in effect that they can reclaim land. It scares me to death to think that we have a guy in our Environmental Protection Agency that Trump put in there that made a living off of suing the Environmental Protection Agency. We need to get people back in there that are responsible, that care about the environment. Otherwise, you're going to see cancer rates skyrocket. If anybody remembers the Love Canal, that's what we have to look forward to. So I would be a protector of our environment. Jealous protector.
Thank you. If you look at the decisions that have been made by this administration, one of the first orders of business for this administration was deregulation. They came in like gangbusters to undo everything that had been done in order to protect us and to protect our environment. Right here in Clark County, you have one of the highest cancer rates in the country. Right here where we sit right now. I posted a map of this region to show where the highest cancer rates exist. And if you look at the map, you can tell that it is concentrated in an area. And I don't think that that's by mistake. I think we need to be looking at our environment. We need to, I think the air and the water quality we need to be paying attention to that. When Michigan first, in Flint, Michigan, when they first came out and talked about the problem with their water supply, nobody paid attention to it. Everybody ignored it. Well, once they got to a point of critical mass where they had brought it to everybody's attention, you would think that something would have been done by now with that problem. They still are dealing with the exact same problem today because we have people who sit in Washington who do not care about the people. We should all be concerned about deregulation. We should be all concerned about fracking and what it's doing to the environment. And the reason why policies like fracking can exist is because we have greedy people in Washington who care about profits and profit margins to the detriment of us and our health. I think that when it comes to things like drilling and mining, that the last administration, Barack Obama's administration, got it right. They understood that we need to be moving in the direction of clean air and clean energy sources. And that did not change when this new administration came in. We need to be doing something about it, and the way that we do that is putting the right people in those seats.
Okay. So we have 6 questions left. So I'm going to ask you guys to limit the amount of time you use per question so we can get through all of them so we don't have to go through the whole process. So this is the last environmental question we have. How important are issues of climate change and climate justice to you? And what will you focus on to secure Ohio's climate security and environmental health? Can you say that again, that last part? What will you focus on? I'll go ahead and read the whole question again. How important are issues of climate change and climate justice to you? And what will you focus on to secure Ohio's climate security and environmental health?
Well, you know, when I mentioned briefly when I opened up about doing some work with the OAS down in Columbia, they were looking at issues of natural hazards, and particularly within the planning process. Because typically, regional planning says, okay, we want to build roads, we want to build shopping centers, we want to build housing, where are we going to do it? And then when you have the natural disasters, flooding, landslides, maybe seismic activity, particularly out west, you say, oh my God, how did this happen? What are we going to do now to retrofit? Well, the idea of integrated regional development planning is to incorporate all those considerations in the planning process before you decide what land to use, where to build, how to build your highways, so that you're not later on playing catch up with Mother Nature. Because the natural events have always happened. Tornadoes, earthquakes, floods. They're part of nature. What's different is when you start building. That's when you start dealing with the disaster. So I'd like to see a little more forethought, more environmental considerations being introduced in the planning process itself, rather than saying, oh, these are just acts of God. What could we have done? How could we have known this was going to happen? The other thing is, small things like reforestation go a long way to prevent flooding. You know, in Darr County, where I live, most of it's agricultural. You get a lot of runoff, you get a lot of erosion, the stream beds get filled up, and then when you get a downpour, you don't have the trees to absorb it. It rushes off, and it comes out of the banks. And this is a typical problem here in Ohio. So I think, once again, it's about environmental stewardship. It's about not just, you know, the profit motive and capitalism are great for certain things. They're great for maximizing revenue, but sometimes they're not so great for the environment. And they take short-term gains at the expense of long-term safety and security. So that's where the government really has a role to play. And once again, I'd love to see the EPA and the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency also beefed up so they can prevent these kind of problems.
I'd like to talk about regulation. First of all, I'm totally committed to giving our children and grandchildren a better earth than we got. And we got a pretty good one, I think, because people were already working on this. But if we roll back all these regulations, we're going to give up most of the gains that we've done, and as long as that rollback is there, we're going to be degrading the earth. And I just hate this idea. Trump came in and said that for every new regulation any of his departments wanted to put out, if they're going to put out a new regulation, they had to get rid of 2 others. Well, that, you know, that's a slogan, and it's stupid. You know, we don't have any government department. There's no department of making up regulations. There's no requirement that your department has to come up with this many this month. You got to get your quota. Those regulations, every one of them, comes up because somebody like Trump is trying to do something for himself, and to the detriment, he doesn't even care about the rest of us. I'll bet there's regulations that if you read the fine print, it's got his name down there. So I hate this when they say, oh, regulations. Shut up, we wouldn't have these regulations if it wasn't for you guys that are trying to cheat. So yeah, we got to get a handle on it. Matt covered it great, and these guys have the essentials better than I do. We got to give a better earth to our kids.
Again, being part of industry, I'm very close to this issue. The company that I work for had 26 air discharge permits, and I tracked every one of them. The people at the EPA office in Bowling Green had my number on speed dial. I work with them very closely. We were on a first-name basis. I think going forward, if there isn't strong regulations in place, companies are going to do what they can get away with. So companies need to be held to a standard. I know we were held to a standard. Our permits were such that we were close to 80% of our capacity, our license to discharge. And anytime you get over 50%, EPA gets really concerned about it. So I was dealing with them on a fairly regular basis. Penalties can be very severe, and they should be. Otherwise, the companies just have, well, we'll just dump it, we'll pay the fine. That can't be allowed to happen. If I were in Washington, I'd be watching that like a hawk. We can't allow companies to get away with polluting our rivers, poisoning our air. And the fact that we have a guy heading the EPA that would like to take it to court all the time is just mind-boggling. Anyway, make a short story out of this. I don't want to run too much time. I'm very much in favor of regulation. I'm very much in favor of public input. businesses are trying to establish processes in neighborhoods. I think we need regulation, and I think that's the bottom line. I don't want to take up a lot of time.
Thank you. I don't know if people remember this, just maybe about 3 years ago, there were birds dropping out of the sky and fish washing up on the shores and some of our coasts. And I remember when I was a little girl, and I'd run home to my grandmother to tell her, "Mom, there's birds, dead birds on the street." And my grandmother was so extremely alarmed by that. And she said, "Let me tell you this." She said, "When you see dead birds and dead fish, that should be an alarm for all of us. Because birds and fish, they feed off of our environment. The same food that they eat, we eat. So that is alarming." And Cincinnati, just a few years ago, and last year, Cincinnati flooded, like within the cities. It flooded there. And everybody's going, "What the heck? Cincinnati's never flooded." Well, the issue is that our roads and our sewage system are not ready for climate change. They're not ready for huge amounts of water and rain. They're not ready for what we expect will happen once we've fully realized the issues with climate change. We need to retool our water treatment facilities. We need to build roads that can absorb the water and the runoff. We need to be ready for climate change. And it goes back to the question that you asked earlier. How do we produce the jobs that we need? Well, our entire infrastructure is aging. We've not done a huge infrastructure development effort in years and years. And we need to do that. We need to do that just to ensure that we're ready for what is to come. But moreover, we've got to, we're not going to get another Earth. We have to protect what we have and ensure that whoever sits in those seats, that they are interested in, that they care about the world that we're going to deliver to the next generation.
Okay. So the next question is, how would you address Trump supporters who really believe that the March for Our Lives movement wants to take away our guns? All guns, sorry. How would you address the rhetoric that all guns will be taken?
First of all, I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe that people should have a right to bear arms. I think that the founding fathers who said that we need to be able to defend ourselves, that was absolutely true. I think that things have changed since the founding fathers said that. At the time, there was a need for citizen military operations and to be ready in a minute. We have professional military forces now that handle those responsibilities, and I think that regular citizens don't need to be armed with military-grade weapons. If we were to, and this isn't the first time, of course, that there was any kind of a ban on automatic rifles and weapons. And when there was a ban on automatic rifles, we didn't have the mass killings that we have right now. And so I think just a little tickler, just a reminder about what that looked like in the past would be what I would do in order to assure them.
First of all, I don't believe the Second Amendment guarantees people a right to own guns. I know Heller made that interpretation, but John Paul Stevens came out with an editorial, I think it was yesterday, debunking that and putting the Second Amendment in context. It's an 18th century amendment. There are people who claim that a big part of it was for the slave patrols and that it has a very racial element. that they wanted people armed so that they could hunt down escaped slaves. But the bottom line is, in the 18th century, there was no police force in any of the cities. There was no standing military. So the founders wanted a militia that could provide for the common defense. And that's what the amendment talks about. But all the gun rights people love to omit that first part of the amendment and go right to the part that says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Having said that, I mean, that's the theoretical part of it, about the amendment. I don't have any problem with someone owning a gun or multiple guns for hunting, for self-defense, for defense of their home, or just because they like guns. I really don't have a problem with that, as long as it doesn't affect me. You know, and I think most Americans come at things this way. We're a big, diverse country, and we're very different from one another. And I think that's a big part of what makes us great as a country. We accept people being different from us. I don't own guns. I don't particularly like them, but I don't have a problem with somebody else if that's their thing. But the thing I would like to see is universal background checks. Because right now, if you buy your gun through the internet or at a gun show, you get a free pass. And I want to see a ban on assault rifles, like we had in the Brady Bill, and a ban on magazines over 10 rounds. And I think that's what all of us have been saying now for years and years. The right does a great job at demonizing us and using this as a wedge issue, because they're focused on packaging. We need to do a better job of getting our message out.
At the time the Second Amendment was passed, it'd take a good rifleman to fire 3 aimed shots in a minute. Now we have weapons. When I was in the service, I qualified as an expert on the rifle range with the M16. And the hardest thing we had to do in training was teaching people not to empty all 18, 19, 20 shells in one pull of the trigger. They would think, oh, I'm just going to pull it for a second, and it was gone. Now, the Second Amendment is not inviolate. It's not like you can't put some kind of a regulation on it. We've done it before. It's just like the First Amendment. You know, you got the right to speak, but you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. Well, the Second Amendment, in 1934, we passed the Wagner Act. And the Wagner Act made it that you couldn't own a machine gun because people were tired of the local police being outgunned by the gangsters. So we passed the law against machine guns, and they defined it as a gun that will keep firing as long as you've got the trigger pull. Now, people who own semi-automatic weapons, they should really have a hatred built up for the guy who invented the bump stock, because with the bump stock, your everyday semi-automatic rifle becomes a machine gun. If we wanted to enforce the Wagner Act right now, we could go and pick up all the semi-automatics. And I hunted when I was a kid up until I was 19, but we hunted for food. If you'd have told my grandfather that there's going to be sport fishing or people firing guns for sport, he'd have just kicked you. He wasn't like real vocal, you know. Anyways, it's a tough issue because the people on the other side are very, very dedicated, and they've been pushed by the NRA to a ridiculous extent.
I wonder how many people here know what the sound of a bullet makes when it goes past your head. Can I see it? Hands? We have one. I know what that feels like. How many people in this room have actually helped treat a gunshot victim? I have. Twice. Third time, I was tasked with the responsibility of cleaning up after the medics had fixed them up. First fellow got shot in the chin. The bullet came out his cheek. Second guy got shot in the back. It was through our efforts that we actually saved those guys' lives. I'm a gun owner. Many years ago, I was also a member of the NRA. I ceased being a member of the NRA when I finally realized that they had become an agent, basically for the gun manufacturers, foreign gun manufacturers, that are shipping arms and ammunition into the U.S. When I belonged to the NRA, the emphasis was on hunting, like Bill said. Now, if you look at some of their publications, they're pushing self-defense items. The bump stock that you mentioned should have never been allowed. It changes the form and function of the rifle that it's attached to. That should have never been permitted to happen. Some of the surveys that I get from the NRA, they actually threaten you. I don't know if you guys have gotten them or not. I've gotten several. One of the questions stated that if I didn't respond to the survey, that they would consider that a hostile act. That's their exact words, a hostile act. I can tell you that survey went right in my shredder. I don't intimidate easily. I believe in regulation. I believe there should be a waiting period. I don't believe that people should have assault rifles. If you need an assault rifle to go hunting, a deer, let's say, because that's what you would want to hunt an assault rifle with. Something's wrong with you. If you need 30 bullets in your clip to shoot at something, something is wrong with you. You need a lot more practice. I don't know if anybody's researching this or not, but if you look at the ammunition or the ballistics of an AR-15 bullet, it's designed to do one thing, and that is to kill. It does devastating damage to the body. You're more than likely to survive a gunshot wound by a pistol than you are an AR-15. I believe we need regulations. I don't think they belong on the streets. I'm in favor of the Second Amendment, but I think we need common sense gun control.
Okay. So we have 4 more questions that are going to go unanswered, unfortunately, due to time constraints. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it to Bill Ebben to give his closing statement, and then we'll go the opposite direction.
I can get to some of the stuff I skipped in the beginning. America's always done best when the mighty middle class was large and had enough wages to have some discretionary spending. The economy is impacted in a much bigger way by 3 or 4 million American families buying a 16-foot runabout or fishing boat than by the 1% who maybe 17 of them this year are going to get a new yacht. The difference is the yacht thing is not even going to show up on the economy. But if the middle class has enough money to buy themselves a boat, that's going to make a big difference. So a large and healthy, mighty middle class is like the golden goose. Everyone makes money when the golden goose is healthy. But now the 1% and the corporations are just greedy enough to kill the golden goose. They're not looking far enough into the future to understand that they would actually make more money if they made decisions that expanded the middle class and made sure that that expanded middle class had decent enough wages that they could spend some extra. Because that's where all the money's made, on the middle class. I said all I want is an America as good as its promise. This is not the America that I thought we'd have when I got to be this age. Of course, I didn't think I'd get to be this age, but I don't want to take up a whole lot more of your time other than to say I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you, and I do need your help because my message, the message about getting rid of the war on drugs and replace it with something that would be successful is not popular. A lot of incumbents are not going to bring that up. A lot of people running are not going to bring it up. And I understand why. Because you're going to get called soft on drugs. It hadn't happened to me yet, but I'm waiting for somebody to tell me I'm soft on drugs. Because at the very least, I'm going to say, well, I'm just tired of being stupid on drugs. Now, so I need your help. I need to win the primary to get that message to Washington. So I'd appreciate your vote. I'd appreciate your donations. And if you've got some energy and some time, I would love to have you volunteer. We need lots of help. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say what an honor it is to be on this stage with these three people, because I think they represent some of the best that Ohio has to offer. Their hearts are in the right place, and I also commend you to come here on a foggy, cold, rainy night to listen to politics, to listen to us talk about things that maybe you know better than we do about. You know, in any year, there are things that as a Democrat I would like to see. There are directions I'd like to see our party move, our country move, our state move. And we've talked about some of those issues: the environment, immigration, drugs, defense, and diplomacy, and what's the proper balance of that. But this is a special year, and I think we're at a moment, we're at a turning point in our history. And without trying to seem like Chicken Little, I almost want to say that the sky is falling, because we are seeing somebody who was exactly the type of person that the founders worried about. The Electoral College was mentioned earlier. The whole reason the Electoral College was set up was to prevent us from getting a president like Donald Trump. Because the founders had a great fear of the popular will. They realized that passions could be mobilized by propaganda and by bribery and by money. And they said, how do we protect our republic from some demagogue getting in there and running the government for his own benefit and to the detriment of the country? And that's why the Electoral College was installed. I really feel like with all the hysteria that's on TV and in the newspaper and on the left about Donald Trump, and you know, Trump doesn't even alarm me as much as the Republicans in Congress do. I think Trump is pretty much a known quantity. We know who this man is. We've watched him all our life. He is who he is. He does what he does. We knew who we were getting. But the biggest surprise to me was the willingness of Republicans in Congress who have stood on principle and lectured the rest of us about the Constitution, about family values, about law and order, lecturing us. And now, not a peep from any one of them. Trump is not on the ballot this year, as much as I wish he were. But every single member of the House of Representatives is. And I see a big blue wave forming across the horizon. And I want all of us to be part of that blue wave. I'm not saying I'm the best person here. I'm in awe of the capabilities and the integrity that's on display here from my fellow candidates. I am asking for your vote. I think it would be the honor of my life to represent you in Washington. And I promise you, if I get sent to Washington, I will do something about the mess that's there now.
I'd like to echo these gentlemen's sentiments up here and say thank you for coming out. We are certainly privileged to have so many people here concerned about the things that we're concerned about. Moreover, education funding our education funding policy systems have been gutted. I know what it's like to struggle paying student loan debts, not just for myself, but for my children. I know what it's like to live on meager salaries. I understand that we live in a society where we have become great at incarcerating a good portion of our population, of our citizenry. We have an opioid problem in this country, and the average American is being left behind. My name is Dr. Vanessa Enoch. I'm running for U.S. Congress to bring fairness, accountability, and real change to U.S. Congress, because working Americans shouldn't die because they can't afford to pay health care deductibles and premiums. Our Social Security benefits shouldn't be taxed upon distribution after they've already been taxed once. It's time to vote in a new Congress that understands the needs of real Americans. Everyone should have an opportunity to succeed and get ahead, and vote for Dr. Vanessa Enoch is a vote for progress. I'm asking for your vote on May 8th. I'm also asking if there are people who are interested in lending a hand in volunteering. My campaign could use your assistance. And of course, if you're interested in donating to my campaign, it helps to get the word out to other people that I'm running and that I can make a difference. I'd like to also invite you to go to my Facebook page. It's Dr. Vanessa Enoch for U.S. Congress. Meet me on my webpage, my campaign webpage at enochforcongress.com. And certainly if you have other questions for me, feel free to reach out. Everybody here, I gave a card and you can access me. My number is on my website, and any other information that you have an interest in knowing. Thank you so much again for being here.
I just realized that I'm probably giving this lady a lot of grief by standing up all the time.
It's all right.
I do videos, so I know what that means. I'd like to echo, too, what everyone else was saying. At the beginning of this endeavor, I was the first one to get into the race. And then I met Bill, and Bill's turned out to be a great guy. Matthew and Vanessa, like she likes to say, is my cousin. Only because we have a common name. My political goals are really totally polar opposite to what Warren Davidson is doing. His main thrust is on the economic side, to make sure the wealthiest of our society reaps the maximum benefits. We need to change that. My political goals are really with everybody that sits in this room, everybody that sends their children to school, wants a better education. I know what it's like to put two kids through school. I have a boy that graduated from college as a design engineer, and my daughter became a teacher after college, teaching kids with special needs and preschool kids. So I have a special affinity for what she does and what she's accomplished in her life. I want to make sure the safety net programs are there, not only for us, but for all those that come after us. And I'm talking about Medicare, I'm talking about Medicaid, fortifying the ACA, making it better. We have a healthcare system in our country that's probably one of the best in the world, but yet it's the most expensive in the world, and we cannot let that continue. I want to be a force for change in Washington, and I can pledge to you tonight that I would do exactly that. I want to work with Sherrod Brown to create change. I want to work with other Democrats in the House to create change, and that's what it's going to take. I spent 35 years working in manufacturing, and when I went into manufacturing, it wasn't at the high level or mid-level. My first job in a steel mill was scraping rust off the steel so it could be painted. They gave me a piece of burlap and a paint scraper to go to it. I know what it is to succeed in an industry going from the lowest level to the highest level. You don't do that by yourself. You do that by bringing people together, forming consensus, and getting the job done. So I want to thank everybody for coming out here. Oh, and I want to mention too that I have everything that everybody else has. Web page, Twitter account, Facebook page. If you want to help me, I'd be very grateful for that help, be it either participation or financial. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Your attendance is so important. And vote, vote, vote. Thank you.
So again, we want to echo, thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for coming out and listening to these great candidates speak about their platform. I wanted to let you guys know that on April 11th, from 7:30 to 9, there's going to be another town Meet the Candidates type event in Troy. It's, if you can remember this address, 556 North Adams Street, Troy. Is that a middle school?
It is.
It is.
I went there 4 years ago.
That's a middle school.
The media's all there as well. I think the papers and.
So yeah, it's going to be a pretty good day. You might be able to get some different questions answered during that event. We are also going to take all the questions that we asked tonight, put those into a survey form, and put them on our website. We'll ask that you guys return that in 7 days. 7.
Oh, man.
You're a college professor. You know how that works.
Oh, I don't think you know what we're going through.
So,
This is my 4th event today.
okay. Okay, so and that will be posted on Indivisible Springfield OH.com. It's on, you guys can grab another one of these out. It's right on the very top. Again, thank you guys for coming, and we can take a few minutes to kind of talk a little bit amongst each other and talk to the candidates, and then we only have the space for a few more minutes, so please be conscious of that. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Indivisible.